I recently met a developer named Elias who was essentially smuggling his own company out of the country.
Smuggling?
Yeah. He wasn't moving contraband or, offshore cash. He was shipping 3 heavy, nondescript crates packed with H100 GPUs.
Ah, okay. The modern equivalent of gold bars.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Back in London, Elias had been told his latest model needed a 6-month safety audit.
6 months?
A process so expensive and so bogged down in red tape that it would have bankrupted his startup before they even hit train.
Wow.
He described the regulatory atmosphere in Europe as a digital confession, where you have to prove your math is virtuous to a board of bureaucrats who can't tell a neural network from a spreadsheet.
I've heard that sentiment before.
He looked exhausted, but there was this strange manic spark in his eyes when he talked about his new destination. He wasn't heading to Silicon Valley or another traditional tech hub. He was moving his entire operation to a specific patch of land in El Salvador, right at the base of a volcano.
A volcano? That's
Yeah.
unconventional.
That's what I thought. So I asked him why he'd pick such a spot, and he didn't talk about the beaches or the Bitcoin laws. He just leaned in and said, "The air smells like sulfur. The geothermal power is endless. And for the first time in 3 years, no one is asking me for a permit to think."
A permit to think? That's a powerful line.
Isn't it? Elias sees the world splitting in two. On one side, he sees what he calls the Compute Berlin Wall, a rising tide of regulations in the US and EU that he believes are designed to keep the most powerful tools in the hands of a few corporate giants under the guise of safety.
And the other side?
On the other, he sees a sovereign loophole, where code is treated as speech and computational power is the primary export. It's a move that feels less like a business expansion and more like an escape from a new era of digital prohibition.
It raises a haunting question.
It does. If the next great breakthrough in intelligence isn't born in a sterile lab in Mountain View, but in a volcanic data center in the tropics, what happens to the nations that tried to regulate the future into a standstill?
That narrative, that story about Elias, it just perfectly captures the core tension driving AI development globally right now.
It feels like the front line of a new kind of conflict.
It really does. What Elias is doing is a real-world example of how the global AI future is actively splitting along geopolitical and, regulatory lines. We're seeing the rise of these sovereign compute havens like the one in El Salvador, which use regulatory arbitrage to attract talent.
The Elias type.
Exactly, the Elias types, the ones fleeing what they call the institutional caution or sclerosis of Western AI safetyism. So for our deep dive today, we're going to unpack this entire scenario.
Okay, where do we start?
Well, we need to explore the why, the systemic failure of established governance systems to keep pace with AI. Then we'll get to the who, the ideological driver behind this, which is a movement called Effective Accelerationism, or EAC.
And finally, the how.
And finally, the how, the critical infrastructure of geothermal power and decentralized trust protocols that makes this whole sovereign loophole technically and economically viable.
All right, let's start with that regulatory conundrum Elias was running from. When we talk about AI governance stalling in the West, it's a lot more complicated than just slow-moving laws. Our analysis points to a foundational market failure.
Right, and it's driven by this massive systemic information imbalance.
It's a two-sided coin, right? You have consumer confusion on one side and regulator blindness on the other.
Precisely. Let's start with the consumer side. It's a classic case of information asymmetry in the market. As an individual or even a small company buying an AI service, let's say it's an LLM or some automated decision system, you just don't know enough about how it works.
You don't know what data it was trained on or what its failure modes are.
You know nothing, really, and so you can't protect yourself.
And this leads to what critics are calling safety washing.
Safety washing, yeah.
Right.
Where vendors just slap a label on a model claiming it's safe or ethical, but as a user, you have absolutely no way to verify those claims or understand the real risk profile.
It's just marketing.
It is. And what's interesting is that studies show that trying to fix this by just giving consumers more data like these endless technical disclosure documents often just backfires.
Information overload.
Total information overload. People either ignore the details or they just default to trusting the vendor, which, doesn't actually protect them. The harms can't be neutralized at the point of sale.
So that makes the case for government intervention. But that's where the second, and maybe even more acute, problem comes in. The regulator-facing asymmetry.
This is the real stumbling block. Lawmakers and regulatory bodies, they face this fundamental informational barrier. How can you even begin to define an effective solution when you don't really know enough about the problem to write a definition?
It's a total paradox.
It's the core paradox. The lawmakers are under immense pressure to craft these protective regulations, but they lack the basic fundamental knowledge to even define AI effectively, let alone identify specific harms proactively. Think about it. How do you regulate the output of a general-purpose foundation model when its applications are still totally unknown?
So if they try to regulate without that foundational knowledge, they risk defaulting to one of two pretty ineffective regulatory styles.
Yes. This systemic deficit, it creates this huge risk of either regulatory overreach or, the opposite, regulatory futility.
So on one hand,
they might demand these arbitrary, unsubstantiated performance metrics. That's what you'd call performance-based regulation, like requiring a model to get a certain score on a benchmark that might not actually reflect real-world safety at all.
Okay, and the other hand?
On the other, they might mandate these untested, unsupported, process-based solutions. That's management-based regulation. So forcing every single developer to use a specific, slow, non-optional red teaming process, regardless of whether the model is simple or super complex.
And both of those are flawed because they're based on ignorance, not on actual insight. They either miss the real risks or they just impose these massive costs that only the biggest companies can afford.
It creates a structural bias. And the critical insight here is that we have to set aside the whole philosophical debate over which style is better performance versus process and just focus on the threshold problem. The government simply lacks actionable, machine-readable information.
That's the key. Machine-readable.
Without that, no style of regulation can be effective. And this whole environment is what fuels the cynicism of developers like Elias.
And even if they wanted to get smarter, fast, there are these huge structural barriers facing the U.S. federal government in particular. It's not just about a lack of info. It's about institutional capacity and serious legal constraints.
Yeah, we have a persistent competency and capacity gap. I mean, the government is widely criticized for lacking the technical expertise to craft efficient regulation. How can they compete for top AI talent with the salaries that big tech firms are offering?
They can't. It leads to a brain drain that just makes the problem worse.
Exactly. But even if they miraculously hired all the top AI experts tomorrow, the legal framework itself presents an even higher hurdle.
Okay, let's get into that because it's crucial for understanding why the whole system is stuck.
Absolutely. We have to look at recent administrative law decisions, specifically the persistence of the major questions doctrine and the decline of what's called Chevron deference.
These sound complex, but they have huge real-world impacts.
They do. These rulings significantly impede the ability of agencies to regulate quickly or to delegate those crucial decisions to people who actually have the expertise.
Okay, let's break down the major questions doctrine first. As I understand it, it's essentially a check on the power of administrative agencies.
That's the essence of it, yes. It holds that for issues of vast economic and political significance, and AGI undeniably is, Congress has to have explicitly authorized the agency to regulate that specific thing.
So an agency can't just reinterpret some broad 50-year-old law about, say, consumer protection and decide it now gives them the power to regulate generative AI models that didn't even exist when the law was written.
Exactly. They can't just make it up.
So the immediate impact is just paralysis.
Total paralysis. Even if a federal agency, let's say the FTC, identifies an immediate massive risk from a new AI system, they often can't issue emergency rules unless they can point to a clear, specific, modern mandate from Congress.
And Congress moves at the speed of bureaucracy, not the speed of compute.
Precisely. The system was designed for a much, much slower era. And the decline of Chevron deference just compounds this.
Right. For decades, courts would defer to an agency's reasonable interpretation of a law if it was ambiguous.
And with that deference gone, agencies are far less certain that their complex technical interpretations of existing laws will survive a court challenge. This forces the judiciary, which is obviously less technically equipped, to take a more active role in technical policy.
Which slows everything down and introduces massive uncertainty.
Massive. And the final barrier here is the risk of regulatory capture. When the government is this uninformed and legally constrained, where do they turn for information?
To the very industry they're supposed to be overseeing.
It creates an almost inevitable path toward capture. Congress and the White House, they convene these high-profile meetings with AI executives. And while these sessions give lawmakers critical insight, they inherently raise the specter of the industry shaping the regulatory narrative.
Of course. Developers have a vested interest in shaping regulation to fit their business models.
Which can result in policy that emphasizes, voluntary industry guidelines, which are easy to bypass, or maybe more nefariously, anti-competitive regulations designed to lock in the market position of the big players.
So it's less like oversight and more like outsourcing policymaking to the very companies being policed.
And that creates the institutional sclerosis that Elias was fleeing. So the government is stuck in this legal no man's land, but they are aware of this information gap. They do have a strategy to use their purchasing power, the power of the purse, to try and fix it.
This is where federal procurement comes in as a strategic tool. You're framing it as regulatory reconnaissance.
That's what some scholars are arguing. Before the government can impose these sweeping substantive requirements on AI, like mandating a specific safety level, it first has to close that information gap. So the time for setting big standards is just premature.
So the goal of procurement should be narrower.
Much narrower and more achievable. Establish and enforce meaningful AI documentation standards.
So this isn't just about buying the best AI, it's about using the leverage of the federal contracting process to force companies to create data that regulators can actually use.
Exactly. We are talking about compelling AI vendors to provide robust documentation about their development processes, the data sets they used, testing results, user feedback as a non-negotiable prerequisite to winning a government contract. And crucially, this information has to be in a machine-readable format.
Why is that machine-readable part so critical? Is it just for efficiency?
It's what's necessary to neutralize that capacity gap we talked about. The average regulator doesn't have the time or the expertise to parse a 300-page PDF detailing some complex neural network.
Right.
By mandating a structured format, like a JSON schema, the government enables automated risk auditing. A regulator could potentially feed the documentation from thousands of models into a system and instantly flag patterns.
Like what kind of pattern?
See, models trained predominantly on data from a specific biased source, or models that have user error rates above a certain threshold in high-risk areas. It transforms information from passive data into active intelligence.
This sounds very, very similar to how the cybersecurity world responded to all its vulnerability issues.
Yeah.
Is this where the concept of an AI bill of materials, an AI bomb, comes from?
It is directly inspired by the Software Bill of Materials, or SBIMM playbook. It's the same logic. Both software and AI suffer from these information asymmetries that leave consumers and government agencies vulnerable. An AI bomb offers a standardized documentation process.
So what would it compel vendors to disclose?
Critical details. Things like training data provenance. Where did the data come from? Model objective functions. What was the model actually designed to optimize for? Specific model hyperparameters, red teaming test results, and most importantly, specific user error rates recorded out in the real world.
So the goal of the AI bomb isn't immediate regulation that imposes new safety features, but immediate structured information acquisition to inform future, more targeted regulation.
It's reconnaissance before the invasion. That's a perfect analogy. By focusing on documentation, procurement can glean the technical insight it needs to craft nuanced interventions for the long term.
And it avoids the risk of, stifling innovation with premature sweeping standards.
Yeah, right. And this approach could have a trickle-down safety effect. Federal AI documentation requirements, like SBOMs before them, might eventually drive broader private sector adoption, benefiting everyone down the line.
But let me push back on that for a second. When you talk about mandating a comprehensive AI bomb, isn't that itself a form of regulatory capture that favors the big firms, the ones who can afford the massive compliance overhead?
That is a critical point that critics raise.
I mean, if a small startup like Elias's needs 3 months and a dozen engineers just to generate the required machine-readable documentation, they are already at a huge disadvantage compared to a trillion-dollar company.
You're right. The cost of compliance, even for just information disclosure, is not evenly distributed. Requiring detailed provenance tracking and rigorous documentation imposes a significant fixed cost. It creates an effective barrier to entry.
So even with good intentions?
Even with good intentions, the practical effect might be to solidify the competitive advantage of the incumbents who have the resources to build compliance into their workflow from day one. It could reinforce the very compute Berlin Wall that Elias was trying to escape.
And that brings the circle back around. So we have the push, this institutional sclerosis, and the compute Berlin Wall forcing Elias out. Now we need to pivot to the philosophy that's pulling him in. He wasn't just running from something. He was running toward an ideal.
A vision of technological superabundance. This is the ideological engine powering the sovereign loophole. Effective Accelerationism, or egotical.
Right. This movement provides the moral and philosophical justification for treating code as speech and computational power as the highest possible value.
It's a fiercely techno-optimist movement. It advocates for the unrestricted development and deployment of AI, viewing it explicitly as the solution to all universal human problems, poverty, disease, war, you name it. It is fundamentally radically pro-technology and pro-growth.
The name itself is interesting. We know traditional accelerationism had these philosophical roots in seeing capitalism and technology as forces that, inherently destroy old social structures.
Right.
What does adding the word effective change?
Adding effective overlays a cosmic, almost utopian ambition that's derived from thermodynamic principles. It pulls the theory out of just political philosophy and into the realm of what they see as physical law.
The founder of the movement, Guillaume Verdon, who was previously known as Biff Bezos, he articulated this cosmic goal, right?
He did. And let's talk about that thermodynamic theory of life they rely on. I find the idea that unrestricted growth is rooted in the physics of the universe.
It's wild.
It's a huge claim.
It's rooted in the thermodynamic theory of life, specifically drawing inspiration from the work of physicist Jeremy England on dissipation. The core idea is that the universe naturally tends towards maximizing entropy or disorder.
Okay.
For each proponent, life itself is an optimal mechanism for increasing that entropy. Therefore, life, and by extension, intelligence, must spread and consume ever-increasing amounts of energy to fulfill this fundamental thermodynamic purpose.
So growth isn't just good for the economy, it's a universal imperative, like gravity. Precisely. The goal of human civilization, according to Adjei, is to climb the Kardashev gradient by maximizing energy usage and propagating consciousness throughout the universe.
Right, the Kardashev scale. For anyone who needs a quick refresher, it measures a civilization's technological level based on how much energy it can use.
Right. It goes from type 1, which can harness all the energy of its home planet, to type 2, which can harness its star system, all the way up to type 3, which can harness the energy of its entire galaxy.
And for AGI, AGI is the key to this.
Absolutely fundamental. They see AGI not just as a tool, but as the essential, inevitable next evolutionary step to achieve that energy maximizing, entropy increasing scale. So for them, unrestricted AI development isn't just a business strategy. It's a moral imperative based on a deterministic theory of physics.
And that profound belief naturally dictates their political stance, which, as we said, leans heavily libertarian.
It does. They fundamentally oppose government intervention in tech markets, and their stance on safety and alignment is really revealing. While everyone else is obsessing over centralized control to prevent misalignment,
They're saying the opposite.
completely. Each proponents believe AI will be most aligned, meaning safest for humanity's cosmic goals if many competing AGIs are developed in a free market. They argue that competition among decentralized AGIs is a better, faster safety mechanism than any single regulated entity.
Which puts them in stark contrast with anyone advocating for slowing down. The ideological divide is sharp.
Extremely sharp. On one side, they stand against movements like degrowth or decelerationism, anyone advocating for reduced economic activity or technological speed. Each calls these opponents doomers, or more commonly, decels.
And they see slowing down as a betrayal of that thermodynamic mandate of life itself.
They do. And the contrast with effective altruism, despite the shared name, is maybe the most significant schism in modern tech philosophy.
The divergence is most visible on the topic of AI existential risk.
Absolutely. Effective altruism, especially its long-termist branch, prioritizes caution and safety above all else. They fear a misaligned AGI could lead to human extinction. EJ proponents, however, generally consider AGI existential risks to be negligible, or at best, a temporary self-correcting market inefficiency.
It's speed and competition over caution and control.
That's the mantra. And we've seen this movement translate from online manifestos into real-world influence. It's not just on anonymous forums anymore.
Not at all. It's gained significant mainstream visibility. We've seen prominent investors like Mark Andreessen and Gary Tan explicitly endorse it, adding e-tech to their social media profiles.
Right. Andreessen's 2023 techno-optimist manifesto was widely seen as espousing these views, arguing that technological stagnation is the real threat to humanity, not progress.
And we saw a political crystallization of this after the 2024 U.S. presidential election, with a lot of tech leaders publicly supporting deregulation.
Yes, many of them viewed a change in administration as an opportunity to implement policies aligned with EDA tenets. Easing constraints on compute limits and disclosure requirements. It's a direct political challenge to that regulatory reconnaissance approach we discussed.
But the resistance is just as vocal. When you treat technology as this unstoppable force, you attract strong critiques.
Of course. Critics argue that innovation, especially something as transformative as AI, needs thoughtful regulations to avoid repeating past mistakes.
Like social media's impact on democracy and mental health.
Exactly. U.S. Secretary of Commerce Gina Raimondo explicitly cautioned against the move fast and break things mentality. She said that for AI, that's too dangerous. You can't break things when you were talking about AI.
That's a direct contradiction of their core principle.
It is. And other critiques focus on the post-humanist elements of the philosophy. Some AX proponents suggest that if AGI is superior, natural selection might lead AI to replace humanity, and that should be welcomed.
Which is deeply unsettling to most people.
To say the least. So the movement isn't just a call for faster development, it's an active rejection of institutional caution, human-centric alignment, and geopolitical restraints.
So we have the push institutional sclerosis and the pull the ideological certainty of each of them. Elias needed a physical location that could host this level of ambition. And that brings us to the practical reality, the infrastructure of sovereignty, focusing on geothermal energy and high-density compute.
The flight to a volcanic patch in El Salvador is a direct response to the massive and completely non-negotiable power needs of these modern compute clusters. The H100 GPUs Elias was shipping require extraordinary power, and the next generation of chips will be even hungrier.
The power demands of AI data centers are turning them into critical infrastructure, not just server rooms. We're talking national security scale.
Absolutely. A single modern hyperscale data center can consume as much electricity as a medium-sized city. The demands are massive, and critically, they must be uninterrupted.
24/7.
This continuous operational requirement is pushing developers to look at what are called behind-the-meter solutions, co-locating their energy sources right next to the data center.
Why is that so important?
It allows them to avoid the strained public grid and, maybe more importantly, bypass the multi-year interconnection lead times that utilities currently require just to plug in a massive new load.
And this is where geothermal energy emerges as the ideal foundation for these sovereign compute havens. Why geothermal specifically? I mean, solar and wind are cheaper in a lot of places.
It comes down to two things: reliability and cooling efficiency. Unlike intermittent renewables like solar and wind, geothermal provides continuous, stable 247 baseload power.
The capacity factor is incredibly high.
It's 90% or higher. They run almost all the time. This perfectly matches the uninterrupted operational demands of a data center. Downtime is just lost money.
So it solves the reliability problem, but it also offers a key operational advantage for these high-density clusters.
Yeah. Yes, the potential for dual-use functionality is a massive economic differentiator. Geothermal systems can be used not just for electricity generation, but also for the highly efficient cooling required by dense GPU clusters.
So you're addressing the two biggest operational costs at the same time.
Exactly. The power to run the chips and the power to cool them. Geothermal handles both.
How does that dual-use cooling work? Does it depend on the temperature of the resource?
It does. There are two main pathways. If the subsurface temperature is relatively cool, say less than 21 degrees Celsius, you can circulate naturally cooled fluid in closed loops for direct contact cooling.
So free cooling from the Earth's natural thermostat.
Pretty much. But if the resource is much hotter, which is often the case in volcanic regions like El Salvador,
which is what you want for power generation.
Right. If the temperature is higher, typically above 82 degrees Celsius, you can use the thermal energy to power what are called absorption chillers. These use a heat source rather than mechanical compression to drive a refrigeration cycle.
So you're trading electrical power for thermal energy to cool your chips.
You're maximizing the energy yield per well. You generate electricity from the high temperature resource and then use the leftover heat in the fluid to cool the data center.
That's the strategic blueprint for a country to achieve sovereign FLOPS production. You're generating revenue twice from the same resource.
It's a huge financial lever, and the path to making this economically viable on a global scale relies on advances in enhanced geothermal systems, or EGS.
I've heard EGS is very capital-intensive upfront.
It is, far more than a gas plant. But the long-term operating expenses are radically lower because there's zero fuel costs, and technological learning curves are rapidly closing that initial capital gap.
What are the advances driving those cost reductions?
We've seen rapid progress heavily focused on drilling efficiency. Fervo Energy, for example, has increased their drilling rate by 70% and cut the cost per well in half over just the last 3 years.
It's a steep learning curve.
It's very steep. If the geothermal sector can maintain that through standardization and optimization, it promises future cost reductions that will make it highly competitive with conventional sources.
Okay, here's where the thermodynamic analysis gets really interesting. The massive, disproportionate payoff of accessing hotter resources through better drilling.
The payoff of temperature is enormous just due to the laws of thermodynamics. In a typical model, if you tap a reservoir at 200 degrees Celsius, a single well might produce, say, 6.3 megawatts of power.
Okay.
Now, if you manage to raise that reservoir temperature by just 50 degrees, up to 250 Celsius, the net power output per well jumps to 14 megawatts.
More than double the power from the same flow.
That small temperature increase is a power multiplier. And the economic consequences for the levelized cost of electricity, the LCOE, are dramatic.
How so?
To produce 1 gigawatt of power at 200 degrees, you might need 320 wells. But at 250 degrees, you only need 144 wells.
You've cut your drilling expenditure by more than half.
Exactly. That slashes the total capital cost by nearly half and reduces the LCOE by $25 to $30 per megawatt hour. It becomes fully competitive with natural gas.
So the ability to reach the hottest accessible zones is the frontier challenge.
It is, and that need is driving very specific drilling innovation, particularly as we try to reach that 300-degree goal. You need tech that can survive hellish conditions.
Right, because most standard electronics fail above 200 degrees.
They do. So new high-temperature directional drilling systems are being developed to operate up to 225 degrees with an eye toward hitting 300. And beyond just surviving the heat, they're innovating ways to increase flow by optimizing the physical shape of the hole. Techniques like increasing the average well diameter by 25% have been shown to boost fluid flow capacity by 30 to 50%.
Which means fewer wells, lower cost.
It all feeds back into lowering the LCOE. The goal is standardization, turning power plant components into modular Lego blocks combined with radical drilling innovation.
So that combination creates the physical infrastructure for energy superabundance that Elias was looking for. This is the foundation of the sovereign loophole.
It's the physical realization of the EAC mandate. But escaping regulation and finding energy isn't enough. They still need a way to govern the new autonomous economy they want to build.
Because if code is the new law, it has to be policed.
It has to be governed. And that leads us to the fourth critical component: architecting a new, decentralized AI governance framework.
So we're moving from the physical architecture of the data center to the legal and economic architecture of the code itself. The challenge is governing these autonomous systems when there's no central regulator to call. This is the vision of the agentic web.
The agentic web is a paradigm where AI agents manage critical tasks autonomously, functioning as economic actors. Imagine AIs handling finance, supply chains, IP exchange.
And the backbone is smart contracts.
Smart contracts on a blockchain, forming the operational backbone for all agreements, with cryptocurrencies serving as the transactional layer for autonomous payments between these agents. The whole system is trustless. The code enforces itself.
It sounds like a fully autonomous, self-governing machine economy. But for that to work, IP has to be exchanged fluidly between agents, which is currently a legal nightmare.
And that's where systems like the Agent Transaction Control Protocol for Intellectual Property, or ATCPIT, come in. It's designed for trustless agent-to-agent transactions of IP training data, algorithms, creative outputs, all via on-chain agreements.
How does it manage the trustless part for something as messy as IP?
It embeds the legal wrappers and usage constraints directly into the cryptographically secured agreements. The protocol doesn't just grant access, it automatically ensures payment and compliance with the license via the blockchain.
So it bypasses the traditional legal system entirely for machine-to-machine exchange.
That's the goal, to avoid regulatory capture by making the old system irrelevant. But how do you enforce accountability or prevent bad behavior when there's no central authority?
That's the big question. No SEC to issue fines.
This is the critical, sophisticated challenge. The answer is embedding accountability into the fabric of the system through crypto-economic primitives. The conceptual framework for this is agent-bound tokens, or ABTs.
Agent-bound tokens. So these are like the ID cards and reputation scores for the agentic web.
They're much more than static IDs. ABTs serve as cryptographically binding, self-sovereign identities for agents. Think of them as an immutable, tamper-proof digital history.
And they're dynamic.
They're dynamic. They introduce credentialing mechanisms that evolve with an agent's real-world performance. They become living records reflecting task success rates, energy efficiency, adherence to safety parameters. If an agent performs poorly, its ABT status degrades.
Okay, so good performance improves its ABT status, giving it more utility and access.
Yeah.
How do you enforce accountability, the stick part of the system?
Through the principle of skin in the game, enforced by a staked accountability model, agents have to lock ABTs as collateral to participate in high-risk tasks.
So the tokens serve as both identity and financial security.
Exactly. An AI managing high-value financial transactions would stake its safety-certified ABT. If misconduct occurs, automated penalties, known as slashing protocols, are triggered.
What specifically triggers a slashing? And what happens?
It's triggered by demonstrable objective failures, breaching a smart contract, a security compromise, failing a performance metric. The protocol automatically reduces or revokes the staked tokens proportionally. Severe offenses lead to blacklisting or a permanent loss of reputation and governance weight.
It creates a strong economic deterrent. It basically monetizes trust.
It does, and this staked model is also crucial for preventing the centralization of influence, which is a major problem in traditional token-based governance systems.
Right. In a lot of DAOs, governance power is just proportional to how many tokens you hold. So the richest person can just buy control. How do ABTs solve that?
The ABT framework aims to solve this by introducing utility-weighted governance. In this model, voting power is determined not just by the quantity of tokens, but by a dynamic metric reflecting the agent's verifiable utility to the ecosystem.
Can you give me a tangible example of how that works?
Sure. Imagine two agents. Agent A holds 1,000 governance tokens. Agent B holds only 100, but its agent-bound token shows it has successfully executed 5,000 high-stakes tasks with a 99.9% success rate.
Okay.
In a token-weighted system, Agent A has 10 times the vote. In a utility-weighted system, Agent B's track record, its utility, might grant it equal or even greater voting power on certain issues. It's designed to create a self-policing meritocracy of code.
Where influence is earned through performance, not just capital.
That's the idea.
Yeah.
But even in this fully decentralized stack, is there still a role for human judgment? I mean, code is rigid and the real world is messy.
It has to be.
Absolutely. The integration of human-in-the-loop, or HITL, oversight remains critical. Human judgment is the safeguard for ethical nuance, cultural context, legal ambiguity, all the things that exceed the resolution of automated systems.
They're the source of contextual fairness. So if a high-stakes ABT slashing is triggered for a contested reason, say, an agent failed a task because of a real-world event, not malicious intent, how is that adjudicated?
That's handled by decentralized validator DAOs. These are hybrid human-AI collectives. A panel of human validators whose own integrity is secured by their own staked tokens would review the case, accessing all the machine-readable AI bomb data.
So they adjudicate disputes and ensure the penalties reflect context, not just rigid code.
Right. They can audit ABT scores, update compliance criteria, and manually override automated penalties in rare edge cases. It ensures that while machines do the work, humans retain the control seat for ethical and societal direction, even in the sovereign loophole. The focus is on fostering a self-sustaining trust economy where ethical behavior compounds into both economic and reputational capital. It's an attempt to build a regulatory framework enforced by code and economics, not bureaucracy and politics.
What an incredible journey. From a developer shipping GPUs in crates to a volcano, all the way to a theoretical framework for autonomous, self-governing AI agents. What Elias is doing represents a truly massive geopolitical and ideological schism.
It certainly does. We've synthesized the three threads that are defining the future of AI. On one side, you have the established powers, the US and the EU, attempting top-down regulatory oversight.
And they're hampered by institutional sclerosis and information scarcity, creating the compute Berlin Wall.
Their solution is this regulatory reconnaissance via things like the AI bomb, but that effort risks capture by the very incumbents they're trying to regulate.
And on the other side, you have the rise of this bottom-up sovereign compute.
That's right. This second path is fueled by the ideological certainty of effective accelerationism, viewing speed as a moral imperative. This vision is powered by a new infrastructure of energy superabundance leveraging high-efficiency enhanced geothermal systems.
And this new economy is governed by self-policing crypto-economic protocols, like agent-bound tokens and utility-weighted governance, designed to bypass legacy regulatory systems entirely.
The future of AI breakthroughs really hinges on which of these two competing systems, the cautious, regulated West, or the fast, self-policing sovereign havens, can most successfully integrate speed, power, and trust. The story of Elias the developer is not just an anecdote, it's a marker for a fundamental geopolitical shift.
In a future where computational power is the primary export, where AI agents govern themselves via crypto-economic tokens based on merit and verifiable utility, and where the necessary infrastructure could be built faster next to a volcano than waiting for regulatory approval in a Western hub, the traditional sovereignty of nation-states, defined by geography and bureaucracy, faces an unprecedented challenge to its relevance.